Hey folks, welcome to Friendly Orbit, the podcast that draws us together no matter how far we fly. I'm Ceres, devoid of degrees and yet full of opinions, and I'm joined by...
Objectively pretentious as always, it's Theia.
And Proteus, who does, in fact, own the odd turtleneck, or three.
That is true.
Proteus, you're back after a long hiatus.
Yay!
So, this episode is dedicated to an argument that I had with somebody that I actually thought was very thought-provoking and led me on a journey to think about the nature of what makes art good. Naturally, a debate that started with, I think this movie is good. No, I think that movie is bad. We moved our way into the upper echelon of debate on what actually makes art good. And having thought about it, I have some opinions, and I'm here to lay down the objective law today.
Interesting.
So can we know what movie that was?
Yeah, actually, the more I think about it, so it didn't start with movies. It started with musicals. The person I was talking to said, psh, Wicked. And I went, psh, Wicked? Wicked is like one of the most popular musicals of all time. And they were like, so that makes it good? And that's how the conversation started.
I can't believe that we're here today talking about art because of two gay witches.
But yeah. So here to lay down the law with me, I have two friends who I'm sure will not contradict me and only aid my opinion.
I'm well known for always agreeing with Ceres. Definitely.
I actually brought the answer here. I can just read it. Art is good when people like it.
Oh, crazy. Holy shit. Podcast done.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll talk to you later. And to all of our fellow Voyagers, we'll catch you out there amongst the stars.
Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
So we checked the back of the note, and it had more opinions on it. So we're back. First things first,
Holy
we're
shit.
going to answer.
How did you add them on my notes? I'm not there with you.
So to start off our discussion, we're going to focus on a basic question before we move into the rest of it, because it's kind of foundational, and that is, what is art? Notoriously a simple question to answer. So this is kind of a PhD thesis in and of itself, but for the purposes of this discussion, since we don't want to actually do an episode on what is art, we want to talk about how to judge art. We're going to just say that for the purposes of this, art is what we commonly recognize as art and kind of all agree is art. Art is something like a movie, a song, poetry, a play, a musical like Wicked, narrative fiction. All of those things are art. And one of the hallmarks of art, well, also tag this in, one of the hallmarks of art is that it entertains, inspires, or teaches, or educates, I guess. That's sort of roughly what art is. Are we okay with that?
Sure. I mean, there's a whole group of art that I would also like to highlight at this point, if that is all right. That is formerly known as crafts, and I really would like to include them in the conversation as well, because historically they've kind of been relegated as not so important and not so artistic and not so special, because they were all the things that women were allowed to do and women had access to and women were supposed to do, such as knitting, crochet, embroidery, things like that. But obviously also art. And also another thing that art can do is decorate. It does not have to do anything else either.
Is that where arts and crafts comes from?
Yep.
That's
where
interesting.
arts and crafts come from.
I didn't know that. But as you were saying it, I was like, is that why it's arts and crafts?
It was an entire movement.
Yeah, I mean, I would also maybe argue that decorating something is a form of low-grade entertainment, right? Like it makes you feel something. Usually that like something is cozy or homey or nice or comforting, right? And that evoking of a feeling in you, I feel, makes it feel like art to me, right? That's, I think, one of the main things that art does is you just look at it and it makes you react in a certain way, right? Usually, ideally, in the way that the person who created it wanted you to react, but obviously not always, right? But especially if you're setting out with the intention to crochet something that will make somebody who looks at it feel at home, I think there's an art to that, right? There's art in that.
All of a sudden, the Home Sweet Home cross stitch has a whole new meaning.
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, and like there is art that is like decorative, I think, in the sense that like it is not designed to attract your attention actively, but just to kind of like passively be pleasant, like to enrich the environment in a kind of like passive way. Like, a painting demands that you stand in front of it and look at it and marvel at it. But some decorative elements are just like, they're like part of the whole, but they don't demand your full attention.
Yeah, like architecture, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Obviously there is some architecture that's like, look at me, see me, love me.
Yeah.
But a lot of architecture is just like, this building looks nice, right? It's well designed.
Or Le Corbusier, where it's just like, I am saying something, but not many understand.
So
Le Corbusier is screaming, is the architecture equivalent of screaming.
Well, yes, but for many it's incoherent screaming because, it doesn't speak to everybody. It's, for many people, it's just, this looks kind of ugly to me.
I'll drink my uncultured drink, not knowing what any of you are talking about, and move on to my next point. So, for the purposes of this podcast, that's what art is. So I'm going to chime in first. I've presented, since this discussion that I've had, I've come up with my formulation of how I think art should be judged. I'm going to run it by you guys. You guys obviously get to critique it, give your opinions on it. And then I would like to also individually visit each of your own opinions on it, because this is, of course, just my opinion on art, and I think basically everything you hear is just somebody's opinion on art, and they're all kind of wrong, and they're all kind of right. I don't think there is really an objectively correct opinion to have, so I just want to hear yours and talk about them, and then I have a grab bag of sort of, they're not really straw men, they're just kind of like other opinions one could have, but I don't have, so they're just men. Hopefully, they're not intended to be obviously like flawed or like opinions nobody could have.
Yes, the discussion men.
Yeah, exactly, discussion men, and we could talk about those. So what is my view? My view is that art is pseudo-subjective, and that's kind of a fancy metaphysics philosophy term. So I'll briefly explain it. What is something that is subjective is something that is shaped by your perception of it. Something that is objective is something that exists independent of perception. So, for example, a subjective feeling or a subjective insight would be, this drink is cool, right? That depends on my perception. Someone else might say that it's cold. Somebody else might say it's not cool, it's lukewarm. Or someone else might even say it's hot. It's subjective, what exactly the term cool means in this context. An objective observation is more like what you find in science. Something that can be measured and is uninfluenced by the opinions of others. So if I say this glass is 10 degrees Celsius, and it is actually 10 degrees Celsius, then as long as all the assumptions around, the thermometer works correctly and the Celsius scale is what you imagine when I say the Celsius scale, then all of that is objective. It's independent of who's observing it. The glass is 10 degrees Celsius. Pseudo-subjective is the middle ground between these two terms. A pseudo-subjective concept is one that lives in the minds of people, but lives in the minds of many people, and therefore has its power. So something that is pseudo-subjective is the value of money. Money in and of itself doesn't have value, and if we all agreed that the value of money was different from what it is, for example, if we all collectively, everyone on the planet agreed that $1 was the price of a house, then that is what the price of a house would be. And then the value of a dollar would instantly grow to fill that gap. But of course, changing everybody in the world's opinion on something is a very difficult thing to do. So pseudo-subjective things can sort of have a somewhat objective sort of veneer. They can behave like objective things, even though they're pseudo-subjective, right? So like money is pseudo-subjective, but you can still go in debt and you can still die from not having it, right? The idea of nationhood, the idea that a nation exists, this is pseudo-subjective. If we all agreed that, the US didn't exist, it would cease to exist. But since we all agree that it does exist, and it can bomb people in the Middle East, right? So,
why would you say that? This episode will be published so much later. This will have, well, maybe it will be still relevant. Who knows?
yeah,
I hope not.
The U.S. bombing the Middle East is evergreen, I think, at this point.
Unfortunately.
But so that is to say,
we are recording this on the 23rd of June, and Iran has just received a couple of bunker.
Wait! No, don't tell them. Don't tell them. This is recorded on the 23rd of June. Can you figure out what we're referencing? All right. So basically, I feel like when we talk about art, having introduced this sort of concept, when we talk about art, I think that we can speak of it on the subjective, pseudo-subjective, and objective level. So on the subjective level, when you speak about art, you're answering the question, do I like it? Is it subjectively good? Is it good to me? But that goodness is a matter of perspective, right? And I would say that it's pretty easy to assess whether or not you like something. But I think if you live in a world where no movie exists that is good that you personally don't like, then you're not capturing that higher area that what makes a movie good also has something to do with what other people think of it. And so this is level 2 of judging art for me, the pseudo-subjective level, which is basically, does the intended audience like it? Does the broad population like it? Is it basically a good version of what it's trying to be? Like, is it resonating with the people who are the intended audience for it, right? This is, to me, is it pseudo-subjectively good? And this is much less wishy-washy, right? Like, whether or not one person likes it or another person likes it, that can always change. Anyone you meet can always give you varying opinions on a piece of art. But whether or not a given movie, for example, was well received at the time that it was released, this is an objective fact that you can sort of talk about, right? And so it gives you another layer to talk about art that is less personal, but is more based in fact, which allows you to have like more informative discussions about it. And then the last level is sort of the objectively. Is art objectively good in a vacuum, no society, no culture, independent of people's observation? Is art good? And I think that is a completely impossible question to answer. I don't know what we could possibly ever say about that. If a masterpiece is made in the forest and nobody sees it, is it good? I don't know, and who cares? So this is sort of my reasoning how I come to the conclusion, basically, that art is subjective, right? Art is subjective or it's pseudo-subjective. Those are sort of the two levels that you can talk about it on. But to just say that something is sort of flat out objectively bad kind of doesn't make sense, because art only exists in the context of the people viewing it. And that's my opinion. I'm sure people would disagree with it. So I guess first off, what do we think?
Proteus, why don't you start?
Well, I start.
You're a
okay.
guest after all.
Thank you. I find it very interesting that you've structured it through various levels, sort of like possibility, accessibility, and how we might use this in an argument. I sense your past as a person who does debate.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like, whether or not something is objectively good, the main reason I feel I don't answer this question is because I don't feel you can really have a conversation worth your own time on that level, right? So you're right. I mean, it is kind of conversation focused, right? I approach it from the perspective of when we judge art, when we talk about art, right? What statements, like, where do we exist in a world of complete fuzz? Do you like it? Do I like it? You can never argue with somebody and have them say to you, "You like this piece of art?" You're like, no, I don't, right? That's the end of the argument. There's no real debate there, right? I can just say I like it, and I think I like it for these reasons. But the pseudo-subjective level is actually really interesting, because this gives you way more to hold on to. It's like, okay, well, bigger groups of people feel about this.
I find this very interesting because now that you talk about it a little bit more, it makes me think of propaganda, where you see, like, I don't know, the listeners.
I'm excited to see where this is going.
Kind of maybe all know these posters of the USSR, or other propaganda posters. I mean, to be fair, we exist in a world full of political propaganda, so you'll find it everywhere. Where you encounter something and very strongly are impressed upon that you are supposed to like this. That this is supposed to be something that is good and right and something that you want to be a part of.
Yeah.
Like the World War II era woman with a red scarf in her hair.
We can do it.
We can do it, you know? Things like that where the art itself is created to convince you to like it.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of brings me to like a further point, right? My viewpoint is clearly inherently anti-elitist, right? So I believe that sometimes there are like movies or pieces of art that didn't get the appreciation they deserved because they weren't exposed to enough people. Like, people just simply weren't aware that this piece of art existed, and so they didn't get an opportunity to enjoy it. But conversely, I find it extremely elitist to say that something that did get that exposure and was very popular is somehow bad art because it just doesn't meet certain objective criteria that like certain people have decided are good, right?
So the
like
indie music argument, only a true connoisseur.
Yeah, it's like, you know, I mean, if your intended audience likes it, that's great, right? But like, if millions of people like the Fast and the Furious movies, then they can't be that bad, in my opinion. I don't believe in this idea that there's some troglodyte class of viewer that somehow can't discern bad art from good art, that can't tell whether or not they're enjoying themselves or not enjoying themselves, and that therefore like something that they really ought not to like, because I, who have a different perspective on the Fast and Furious movies, personally do not like them, right? So that's kind of my perspective, right? That like art exists to entertain, inspire, and teach each person individually. And what it does to that individual person is not really for an outside person to say. And so it's not really for an outside person to say this art is bad in an objective sense, because it's always the question is bad to whom, right? Bad to you. You don't like it. You've seen it all before. It's full of plot holes, whatever, right? But good to other people, right? And if millions and millions of people say it's good to them, then I'm willing to say it's probably, in a pseudo-subjective sense, good. In a subjective sense, it depends on you. And so then that's sort of, I don't know, that's sort of my opinion, right? So I feel like it's an inherently like anti-elitist sort of opinion where like, of course, every critic is allowed their own opinion, but you can't make these objective sweeping statements, right? That something is just slop.
Yeah. I'm gonna talk about it more during like when I express my when we focus on my point of view. But what I definitely have to say about this is that there is totally a cycle of like new arts and new mediums of art being treated as lower forms of art in the beginning, and then kind of being canonized, and then the same kind of like early products of that medium of art, for example cinema, become like the new canon, the new golden standard by which all modern movies get judged. And so you have this cycle where cinema, for example, was treated as a lesser, cheaper form of art that is like immediately gratifying, and oh yeah, of course the masses love this. It doesn't require any intellectual demand. You just watch the train drive into the station and are entertained. And now we've come all the way around where Francis Ford Coppola is making shit movies while thinking that he is the artist who will deliver us from the evils of society, you know?
I had that written down too, right? I was like, basically,
like go full circle.
Exactly, yeah. You know, and at some point, TikTok NPC streams will be the high art of the past, right? But I think there is this point. Bad art is often a generation early or beloved to a different group than the person who's reviewing it, or somehow just marginalized or excluded. But it works on someone, right? And if it works on someone, it has some value. And if it works on many someones, then it starts to have a lot of value. And I feel like you can't just dismiss it out of hand just because it doesn't meet your personal criteria.
Yeah,
for
like
goodness.
the value of art is like a very dynamic like value because it's subjective, and it's not just subjective, but it's like a function of time and place, right? Like geographical location also has a huge effect on how certain types of art are valued, or like aesthetic sensibilities.
Like a movie about destroying the two towers would resonate very, very poorly in the US in 2001, but would resonate extremely well in a Taliban headquarters.
I have 2 points that I had to think of, and I have to say them before I forget them.
All right.
Number one is the what you said about critique, Theia and Ceres, reminded me of this interview. It was part of a German publications series on a culture critic, and it's this German culture critic who looks at German brain rot memes. And it was very interesting because you could clearly tell that there was a large disconnect between the art and the context that this culture critic was used to and these brain rot memes. But what I really appreciated was that he highlighted that this means something to someone, and definitely to a certain group of people, and that in itself makes it a valuable medium.
Yeah, I mean, what was impressive to me about that video is how this critic, this professional, art critic, found meaning in it that I wouldn't have found, but that I felt after having been told it. Actually, yeah, I think that is what it's about, And so it's
I haven't seen this video. Do you want to actually talk about what kind of meaning, even briefly, what kind of meaning he found in brain rot memes?
I don't remember it well enough. What was it?
The one that I remember the best is there's a series of memes with a fish. It is a sort of it's an image, it's all animated, it's a fish that is presented in various contexts, and the fish rotates. That's all it does, and it rotates in different ways, vertical, horizontal, etc. And the culture critic highlighted that it is kind of a commentary on bizarre everyday situations of the bizarre everyday, and commented on its similarity to older art forms like Dadaism.
I was literally I have the Wikipedia page of Dada like right in front of me right now, because I was like, what this reminds me of? This reminds me of Dada.
Rotating fish is Dada.
Yeah, listen, if there ever was a brain rot art movement of the 20th century, it's Dada, right?
That's
wait, let me
the origin.
Wait, let me. I mean, I think that like more than the origin, it's like there were similar feelings in the 1920s and in the 2020s that gave rise to similar forms of artistic expression.
Yeah,
I definitely feel like the 1920s and the 2020s rhyme. You know what I mean?
Yeah, with the pandemic and military
fascism.
Economic shocks, hierarchicalization of society, unequal distribution of wealth, alienation from the work, rising fascists.
Exactly. First, queer rights
all the hits.
Or queer rights become stronger, and then there's a turning point, and queer people are hunted down again, or like have less rights. It is a time.
There was a second point you said.
Yeah.
Yes, there was a second.
Wait, before we leave this point, I just wanted to bring up the poem by German Dada poeter Hugo Ball, which is Karawane, which literally is just like a bunch of nonsense. Like, I'll read the first two verses. Iolifanto bambla o falli bambla, grossi gamfa habla horem, and then it just continues like this. And I just wanted to say that this was the original Skibidi toilet. Anyways.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yolifanto Bambla.
Don't let people who enjoy Skibidi Toilet find the Caravana. We might have another hit song on our hands.
Don't worry,
Yeah, I mean,
we do not have the media like presence on this podcast to influence anyone.
I think that also that's part of what's interesting about art is even when humans aren't trying to say something, and I'm not saying that Dadaists and brain rot meme artists aren't trying to say anything, but I think even when humans try not to say something, they say something, right? And so the art is always at minimum an interesting reflection of like the historical times and the consciousness of the person who made it, right?
Yeah, because at least there's a reason why you did this, even if you didn't want to say anything. There is a reason why you did this and not something else.
And so on that subjective level, art can always have value. On the pseudo-subjective level, if like it only resonates with one person in the whole world, all right, yeah, then it's not as good as other art that really resonates with people, you know, all across the world on the pseudo-subjective level. But that doesn't mean that on the subjective level to you, it can't be really good art, which is also kind of how I view D&D, right? You don't make stories that are great on the pseudo-subjective level. You're not going to challenge Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings with your improv Thursday night sessions. But to you personally, but okay. But to you personally, right? You can make a story that's so personal and meaningful to you specifically, right? That it can on the subjective level be more valuable to you than Game of Thrones, because when I read Game of Thrones, I'm not hanging out with my friends making poop jokes.
Yeah.
Speaking of friends, that was the thing I wanted to say about the Fast and the Furious films. Is that it is really, really important to have media franchises and art that speaks to a lot of people, because it is invaluable in creating community and highbrow quote-unquote art that hangs in some sort of gallery and a couple of culture critic think are revolutionary, but nobody else ever sees, won't do very much towards that. So really, there's a lot of different dimensions in which art can be good, and creating community is definitely one of them.
And this
to bring an example with a smaller like delta in terms of mental load, but art that requires less mental focus and attention, and that like helps, like is easier to kind of bond over, and also be just like a time of gathering, just like you said, like not just the Fast and Furious movies, but sports, watching soccer, for example. Like you don't have to pay attention for 90 minutes. And to bring an example from the world of art, because like I don't know if watching sports can be considered an art, so I'll move on to something more straightforward. When I watch Andor or Severance with Copernicus, we are like quietly eating and like watching. But like
Fully
if we're watching a dumb sitcom, we are talking all the time and joking and asking each other questions about our day, and it's much more of a bonding moment. And that's something that I've noticed, because in the beginning I felt a little bit bad about watching sitcoms because I thought this is just kind of wasting my time. But after watching a lot of these serious shows, I thought actually I kind of miss the easy dinners with a stupid sitcom on where we're actually talking about something else. And the sitcom is lightly entertaining us, but it's not really challenging us to the point that we can't talk. Because if I miss a single line of Severance, then the goat plot doesn't make any sense.
Exactly.
So art can be a medium for connection.
And so just to drive my spear all the way into the heart of the argument, right? The point that I'm trying to make is that the objective criteria people try to create for art invariably, in my opinion, devolve down to their personal preferences. And when Brandon Sanderson tells you how to write a good novel, at the end of the day, he's usually teaching you how to write a Brandon Sanderson-like novel. And when somebody says, oh, this art is good because it does this, that, and this thing, they're really telling you their opinion of what they think art makes art subjectively good to them. But they have nothing objective to hang their hat on, no matter how much people try to do so. So often they'll say, oh, this art is in a bad medium, right? It's in a cheap slop medium for the masses. And like Thea said, that's often a reflection of their own biases and the culture of the time. Or they'll say, oh, well, this art doesn't teach you anything, which is a reflection of the fact that this person has a degree in art, and so they think teaching and learning is important and that art should have more of that function. This is just an example. I'm not saying this is always true, right? But so I find that invariably there is no objective answer, right? And that art doesn't need objective answers, which sometimes causes people to say something like, oh, so just because any art is popular, it's good? Yeah, Hitler was popular. Was he good?
Hitler's art was not popular.
Yeah, exactly. But like Hitler himself, right? And I'm like, well, Hitler isn't art. Art doesn't need objective answers the way politics, morality, and other areas of life need, because art is just there to entertain, teach, and inspire. An important function. But the worst thing that can happen when you watch a piece of art is that you don't like it, and then you move on, right? I have some more nuanced thoughts on some of this that we can get into later, but at the end of the day, I don't believe that art needs objective answers, and I think it doesn't really, right? I think like when you go into like morality and stuff like that, there's probably also not objective answers, but we kind of force ones because we need ones. But with art, you don't need that forcing process. So I say art can't really be objectively graded. It can be pseudo-subjectively and subjectively graded. That is my argument.
Yeah.
Okay, what about you, Thea?
Speaking of politics, so when you posed me the question of like what makes art good, I was like, all right, there is no where do we even start? And I started, and one like I genuinely agree with what you said about. So I will not repeat. I will try to not repeat things that you've already said. One thing on the point of people saying like this piece of art is bad because of the medium, and that there is no objectivity to any critique. I will say that there is, like, once you frame the art within the medium that it was like created in, and within the genre that it was created in, and when we start to look a little bit more into like what kind of art it is, then I think we can start kind of like finding parameters. For example, the Fast and Furious movie. What makes a good Fast and Furious movie is not the same thing that makes a good gritty war movie, right?
Yeah.
Those are two different things, and I think that you can say this Fast and Furious movie was bad because we explored the dark psychological ramification of living a high stakes, high risk life of smuggling drugs, and that is not what Fast and Furious is supposed to like sell you as a brand of art, right?
To be about.
Exactly. That's just exactly. And so there are within mediums and within genres things that make a piece of art successful at being that type of art, and some that don't. Also, I would like to point out that there is, I think,
I have one critique of that, though, which is the concept that sometimes a movie is really good because it defies its genre and either carries the genre to a new space or just makes a good movie in and of itself, even though it's not a good, let's say it's not a good thriller movie, but it's still the best version of that story. You know what I mean? How do you feel about that?
Well, I think that there is always going to be outliers on the one hand, and second, there is always going to be innovation within a medium. Cinema today is not what cinema was 100 years ago, and cinema in 200 years will also be very different. So I think that there is absolutely space for change, and what, again, medium, genre, era, all these things have an effect. That's why I didn't say what makes a good action movie, but what makes a good Fast and Furious movie, because action movies as a genre have also changed. But the Fast and Furious movies very much feel like relegated to like a few decades and a very specific brain space in terms of what you expect from them and what they demand of you.
And I think, just as a side thing, right, like, if you want to take that example of, like, you know, what makes a good, like, if you want to take that example, if you tried to figure out what makes a good action movie, well, if you take a lot of old action movies and show that were really good at the time and show them to people today, they're kind of slow and boring. And if you took a lot of our action movies and brought them backwards in time, first off, you probably topple the world government with the butterfly effect, but secondly, people would probably get a heart attack watching them, right? Because they would be
Yeah.
like, "This is what the fuck? This is like 7 different stories, you know?
Yeah,
I've
there's
barely
always
caught up with this one character."
yeah. Yeah, I've heard a couple of times like this, like comparison of like people complaining that today's generation doesn't have that people have increasingly lower attention spans, and like that is driven by like our technology and like social media, and while all of that is true, someone brought up the other side of the argument that if you left like a medieval peasant like browse TikTok for 10 minutes, he'd probably just like get a heart attack just from the amount of information, color, noise, and like things that you'd be exposed to within 10 minutes
Yeah.
compared to
yeah,
like
exactly.
what
Like the ability to, we get distracted easily, but we also absorb and process information pretty quickly and deeply, and then can like switch topics easily, and still like
Yeah.
we can like the kind of multitasking or at least rapid sequential like task shifting, right? Is something that we're probably pretty good at.
Yes. And so, second, I wanted to point out there is such a thing as like a demonstrable human standard for beauty. I'm not going to start citing specific research, but like I have done a little bit of research for this episode, and there have been several studies that have shown that people of different culture, different ages, also people with different like not only neurotypical but people who are affected by neurological disturbances do tend to have like a more or less coherent like sense of like of beauty when it comes to very elementary like very simple things. Like symmetry is beautiful, proportion is beautiful, fractals are beautiful. This like the whole concept of the golden ratio from like the classic Greece and then later Renaissance art, that there is beauty in proportion. These things have demonstrated to be true, and they probably have evolutionary like evolutionary origins. For example, in our ability
like
to detect health and
exactly.
distinguish the healthy from the sick. And a lot of asymmetry in bodies is caused by parasitic infections. And we definitely
so
have.
Like you want to be able to identify the partner who's healthy as well as the deer that's good to eat.
Exactly.
And both of those are probably more likely to be symmetrical and proportionate
exactly.
on average in an evolutionary setting than otherwise.
Yeah, very much so. And the fact that we have this kind of like innate sense for like certain things are beautiful and certain things are not, also has a bit of a dark side, because some people are suffer from injuries that make them asymmetrical or are born that way. And while in the past there might be like evolutionarily there might be a very pragmatic and amoral reason to like
to not reproduce with that individual.
Definitely not reproduce with those. Yeah, exactly. Not reproduce with people who are who carry diseases like that, or who are not, or simply will not be able to provide for your child in an era where food is not a guarantee at all.
Well, today, and where survival isn't a guarantee, right?
Survival exactly isn't a guarantee. Today, we have, thank God, we have surpassed a lot of these issues with our technology. But the media, in a lot of ways, has made tropes out of these sensibilities that we have, and actually created and accentuated, I think, these sensibilities by creating stereotypes of deformed villains. And that is also something that I want to point out, that like beauty and is not morally good. Like there's not an equivalence between the something that is like beautiful or entertaining or pleasant and it being morally good. And that is kind of what I want to read in next, is that I have heard a lot the argument about media, that it's that like media isn't meant to be political.
Wait, before you move on to that,
yes.
I think also the idea of having deformed villains comes a lot from also where we have like fat villains, right? Anyone who doesn't fit into our current modern beauty conceptions, right?
Sure.
It's easier to cast as a villain, right? So I think there are evolutionary reflections in there, but also just cultural ones, right? Like as a culture, we come out of and probably still exist in a very ableist one.
Yeah, though, I mean, I would like to challenge the idea that we have always been this ableist and this very attached to beauty, because there are archaeological finds that show that humans have helped and cared for and had kids with disabled individuals, severely injured individuals that had disabilities because of those injuries, and things like that. So, and I mean,
I think you can overdo it. Like, you can make too much out of the argument Theia was making, right?
Yeah,
Like,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that we never did it, but that, you know, like before we had
happens at a lower
civilization, before we
percentage,
had
probably.
agriculture. Yeah, before we had like
I mean,
agriculture and we
yes,
were hunter gatherers, the pressures might have been different. Like already ancient Egypt means, sorry, I would just want to say already like ancient Egypt or like Babylon, in terms of civilization, our civilizations were at the point where surplus of food allows for people who are not able to be hunter-gatherers or food producers to be very valuable members of society, just in other positions, right? Like scribes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was referring to hunter-gatherer finds, archaeological finds. But what I was trying to say with that is that when we talk about art, it kind of can also help us think about how we react to beauty, but also as people, we are absolutely able and sometimes invite the ugly and surround ourselves with the ugly on purpose, or the things that we do not consider the most beautiful. So,
Oh, I'm kind of an expert in that.
I would like to. I don't know what you're trying to say, Thea. The interpretation.
I think that was insulting us. I'm pretty
Exactly.
sure.
The
No, I was
interpretations
not
are
insulting
kind.
you. I was I was saying
would
that
like
I
to
like
point
to
out-
draw and like art of like bugs and parasitic stuff and
Yes.
mushrooms and all kinds of things that are not meant to be like conventionally
That don't
make
you
people
happy
feel
and
good.
fuzzy inside.
Exactly. No, they
People
usually make you
love
wiggly
art
inside.
forms.
Or actually, I mean, they make you unhappy and fuzzy inside.
Unhappy and fuzzy.
Let's say if it's a mushroom.
Unhappy
Something
and fuzzy
that
name
makes
of this
you
mold.
wiggly inside if it's a parasite.
Aw.
Okay, but you were saying, right, you were bringing this up partially to say that beauty isn't inherently moral and doesn't make art inherently good, I guess? Or where were you going with this?
Well, not necessarily, but that like, you know, like art that we call beautiful isn't necessarily like, doesn't have to be morally justified. That these are two independent things. And I was having some thoughts lately about also for this episode about the idea of art having to be kind of like disinterested. That if there is an intention behind art, such as like to spread an idea, like a political idea, or to indoctrinate or to spread hate, then it cannot. It must it cannot inherently be like good art, or like it's not even art at that point because you're doing it for some other reason. But then the more I thought about it, the more I said, no, that's not true, because the more we go back in time with art, the more we are very willing to accept some beautiful art pieces that celebrated ideas that we do not like at all anymore, and say, ah, yes, this is a great painting. One that came to mind is a mural, giant, like wall-sized painting of the crowning of Napoleon as Emperor of France that is currently in the Louvre. And like, I don't think that painting expresses like that painting celebrates imperialism and war and
exactly.
and colonization
Might makes right.
and the European and like the dominance of like Eurocentrism and
white
all of those
supremacy.
things. Absolutely, all those things, right? Christianity, like you throw them all in. There's all the cardinals are there. The legitimization of power through God. All those things are there, but like
sexism.
yeah, I can't look at that painting and be like, oh, this is ugly because it's morally wrong and it's spreading a political idea I disagree with. But a lot of people feel like this today. So one thing that I kind of one of the things that I kind of came to a conclusion, and you're feel free to disagree with me here, but I do think that we need to kind of like we need to be entertained by
Mhm.
art, as in like art need like good art entertains you, and then almost a lot of art, not all art, but a lot of art has some kind of message. It can be very simple, like fables, be nice to one another, and if you're a piece of shit to others, then they'll be pieces of shit back to you. There can be very simple and moral. There can be very simple moral and messages in art. There can be very explicit, very controversial meaning in art.
Mm.
And I think that we are a lot more sensible to those messages when the art piece is contemporary and it's from our own culture, because we pick up the signals and we usually have very strong opinions about them.
Yeah.
And B, we're much more okay with just overlooking messages, or just simply be able to be entertained by a piece of art if the opinions and messages expressed in there are ones we agree with. Third, naturally, if the art piece comes from a culture that we're not familiar with, we are much more prone to overlook them, or to just not to think too much about them. And that goes both from like separation in space in terms of culture, like a
Mhm.
movie from China, a movie from Japan would be missing a lot of cultural context, right? But it can also be,
Wartime.
yeah, or it can also be a French movie from 100 years ago, or a
Yeah.
painting of Napoleon of 200 years ago. I think that if I was me 200 years ago with my current ideals, I would feel very upset at that painting. But right now I can look at it and say like, wow, romantic, neoclassical art from the late 18th, early 19th century in France was really good. They were really good at this.
Yeah, I mean, so the first thing that comes to mind for me, right, is when you talk about disinterested art, right? It's like, I think all art has a message. Some is just louder, and some is just quieter. Some is more intentional, and some is less
I was gonna
intentional.
say some
But
is
all
intentional.
art, but all art says something, right? Even if you think you write a completely neutral story and you hand it to someone, they're gonna find messages in it, right? Just about what the nature of goodness is, or how the people interact with one another, what ways of interaction are considered normal, right? So on
Yeah,
and
I
so
mean,
forth. Like
even
almost
making a
any.
shitty drawing of a flower is like, this flower is worth drawing because it's nice.
Exactly,
Like
right?
it's yeah.
And you use certain colors because that's the colors you think the flower has, or that's the colors you think the flower doesn't have, right? But there's no completely neutral choice, in the way that there's also nothing that's like truly completely apolitical, right?
That leads very well into my take on judging art. If you're
Well,
okay.
I want to rest on this point for a moment, on like, is good art moral art, right? Because that's basically what Theia proposed, and that was one of the criterion. That was one of the discussion men that I had for later in the episode, right? Like, for example, if you extrapolate from my thing, right? If a piece of art is liked by many people, then pseudo-subjectively it's probably good, right? If you take that rule and you go, okay, well, what about like Birth of a Nation, right? Which is one of the first movies ever made. It's a white supremacist movie in the US, right? I'm sure it had its audience at the time, but we would look at it today and we would say, no, this is obviously bad art because it spreads a hateful, evil message, right? And so it's like, but then you get into the what is good and what is right, and like
what is moral?
Yeah, and
who
exactly.
decides what is moral?
And can art be morally bad, but in some other quantity still ultimately good, right?
Yes, and this only works if you have the power to decide what is morally good and morally bad, and if you are part of the culture that gets to say what is morally good and morally bad. I mean, people, one can argue, could always have the empathy to know that slavery was bad, right? People have always been people in that sense that they could have just freaking talked to people.
I mean, I think there is a component of morality that's inherent. Like, almost no matter what you do to a person, they won't like killing people. Like, it's extreme. There are certain just base behaviors that we consider moral that are very difficult to train out of a person that almost all people have.
Yeah, usually they're based on the survival of the species, right? But things like slavery, right, that we very clearly now see as morally bad, morally repulsive. People at the time where slavery was completely normal were absolutely capable of deciding that actually slavery is morally objective and we should not do it anymore. But
And they did, right? And then
eventually,
exactly, and that's
right?
how it changed, right? I mean, but it's an important, right?
Exactly, but
When people
is a
say,
concept.
the slavery was sort of inevitable, there was no other way that it's like, well, but then they did change it, so
Well,
clearly it wasn't inevitable.
Also, like, the concept of slavery is a multifaceted and long history, right? And we have forms of slavery as far back as the ancient Greeks that we definitely know about, and that probably existed way before then, right? But there was many different ways of thinking about slaves, and many different ways that people justified it to themselves. You know, whether it was indentured servitude or some other idea where
Mhm.
people lived on the land, and if you owned the land, you owned the people,
Mhm.
and things like that.
Like
so
serfs.
people exactly like serfs. So there was a billion ways to justify it, but at the end of the day, right, we, no matter how you cut it from our perspective today, it was still morally objective. So it really depends on the context and who has the power, who has the cultural power to
Well, I mean, there's people who have the
indicate
cultural
that.
power to set the tone for the rest of the population, but the rest of the population could still make their individual decisions.
Yes, absolutely, but imagine you're in ancient Greece and you go around trying to free a bunch of slaves. You very quickly are going to be faced with a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the thing with morality is that it doesn't have objective answers the way art does, in a very similar way. But we need objective answers because there are certain behaviors that we absolutely need to curtail. But what is moral keeps evolving and developing. If you take the
Exactly.
moral outlook of a 15th century peasant and you bring them to today, basically the world has ended, right? Their view of the world, their moral view of the world, we all live in sin all the time. And it would be awful. It would be extremely distressing to see, right? And if we and if we went back, right, to the 1700s and witnessed just abundant chattel slavery all around ourselves in the southern United States, we would be morally horrified. And we would feel like we were in a completely different world, right? So morality is a continuously updating philosophical construct that values whether or not actions are good or bad. And although there are components of it that are mostly components of it that seem to be inherent and sort of seem to cross times and contexts and belief systems because they have an evolutionary anchor, and we don't yet modify ourselves in any transhumanist ways that change our base evolutionary anchor to some form of morality. Overall, it is still very changeable over time, right? And the world that we think is moral and good, like in 300 years, I'm sure we will look and we will be horrified by the cultural actions that people take. Our world will have ended, but the people at that time will generally be okay with it. And will say, no, this is actually, they'll have their justifications for that behavior. But the thing is, if you're in this swamp of moral relativism, you can justify anything because humans have used it to justify anything over the centuries. And there are behaviors that I personally believe are, of course, obviously morally repugnant and evil, and that we want to ban. And so it's very difficult to jump across these worlds, as Theia was saying, and then judge art from 200 years ago based on the moral criterion. But we are very sensitive to art based on the moral criterion that is contemporary to us, because we hear the message and we feel the debate, and it impacts us more closely, and it has to do with our lives, our present, our future, and even our recent past, right?
Yeah,
And
we're more like we let ourselves be more like just entertained by the art without thinking too much about its background when it's really old, because it doesn't touch us so personally, and because we don't even have the cultural context, to view. I mean, I'm sure there is paintings that of noble people in I mean, one for all, King Louis the XIV and his super famous painting, royal painting that is always associated with absolute monarchy, that like we celebrate as like a great artistic achievement in terms of craft and skill, and we talk about its like historical significance in a very sterile way, because that's how we tend to talk about history today. We try to stay impartial, if that is even possible. But like, of course, like we stand against everything that painting wants to represent, right?
Yeah.
Like nobody nobody ever tries to I hope use that painting and look at that painting and say, ah, yes, the good old days. But we do look at that painting and say, how beautiful.
Yeah,
And there
and
is
if
no
you took a modern
contradiction to us.
painting, exactly, if you took a modern painting of a genocide that was going on right now, it would be hard, no matter the quality of the beauty, or how well the brushstrokes are, or how good the composition is, or how symmetrical the fucker is. You would look at that painting and you'd probably say, "This is awful," right? And especially if it was like glorifying that genocide, right? Of course, if it was like critiquing the genocide, you'd be like, "Aha, yes, important," right? But if it was just like, "Oh yeah, great," right, you would be like, I can't stand this painting, right? It doesn't matter how beautiful it might appear to someone else on the surface. When I look at it, I see only the moral ugliness of the message that it represents.
Well,
Yeah.
art can absolutely be used as a tool for morality, but I would like to question whether morality has to be present for art to be good, because that's not something that I
No, we
can
have. I
entirely
think we
subscribe
have
to.
pretty much I mean, I don't know. I think that so far what we have said is that more goodness and morality, like goodness is in the art piece is good, like beauty or entertainment value, and morality are separate, or can be separate at least.
Okay.
Yeah, I would argue that, to bring it into my structure, morality claims to produce objective lines for behaviors that are good and behaviors that are bad, and therefore operates on a level on which I wouldn't critique art, right? And so you can bring in subjectively, is it morally repugnant to me? Then you can say, oh yeah, I didn't like that movie because it's morally repugnant to me. And pseudo-subjectively, yeah, the audience thought that the movie was morally repugnant, so they did not like it, right? But whether or not it is objectively good, like morality operates on that level, right? Is it good or is it bad, right? And then it's operating sort of on a level that in my argument, in my schema that I illustrated at the start of the episode, you couldn't really grade it on.
So, if I may move into my
Yes, let's move on to
Yes.
you.
on judging art.
Let's do it.
I personally, I come from a different background on just worldview wise, and maybe also like what I've studied. So I'm greatly influenced by constructivism / radical constructivism, in the sense that to me, when we look at the world, we as individuals create our own realities, which means that there is no objective reality, but only our own perception of things that we can attempt to communicate as well as we can to one another. And art is a big part of that, right? Because it is something that, like I said earlier, frequently brings people together, and it is something that people enjoy talking about. And when we talked about this topic as something that we might want to talk about on the podcast, I really wanted to join, because I would like to champion the idea that it's really hard to do bad art. That the scope of quote unquote good, at least in my perspective and my subjective reality, is incredibly wide, because it is something that is so innate to humans, and it is just in and of itself, in whatever forms it may take, a small miracle and a small wonder. And even if people find it derivative or morally ambiguous or bad or find it ugly or disturbing. The fact that somebody has chosen to perform art in whichever way they have is special. I mean, it's an expression of our free will. It's an expression of our consciousness. It's an expression of frequently the human condition in one way or another. It's a way that we try to communicate our own world with other people, in whichever medium the artist so chooses. And
Can you elaborate a little bit on constructivism?
On
Because
constructivism.
it's not something that I'm like super familiar with, but I think it's interesting. Like, do you have any like background on like when this sort of concept was first sort of coined or developed, what it's sort of used for normally? Because I would say, right, from a scientific standpoint, right, that's my background. To say that there's no objective reality is kind of like, well, then you couldn't apply the scientific method, right? I mean, science tries to craft an objective space in which when we talk about things, we all are talking about the same thing that has exactly these measured properties.
Yeah.
We don't talk about any element of it that is, subjective, except for in the very most generally agreed upon sense, such as saving the patient is a good response, right? When you'd say, oh, well, good on the goodometer, where is that objectively measured, right?
Well,
But it's such common ground, right? That other than that, science operates in like either entirely objective or almost like or subjective things that everyone agrees on.
well, the constructivist perspective on things is fairly widespread. I mean, obviously, it's a philosophical thing, but we also find it in sociology, psychology. My background is in educational science, so it's very important when you look at how people learn and how people might perceive things and interact with the world, to kind of keep in mind that we're all only experiencing what our brains are managing to process. So the scientific method is, in a constructivist idea, a kind of desperate attempt to pretend as if we can all agree on something. I mean,
I would argue maybe that these are two philosophies that are aimed at different things. The scientific method is great for describing the objective elements of the world, but if you want to solve a conflict or analyze the different perspectives people have, the constructivist philosophy is going to help you much more, right?
Well, yes. I mean, I'm not arguing this to say that,
like constructivism builds bad rockets, and the scientific approach might not resolve a conflict between you and your stepmother very well, right?
Yeah, the scientific approach is like descriptive, but it's not really normative in any ways. It's not
I
normative.
Would love to see. I would love to see a constructivist approach to building a rocket ship. That would be. That's
like the orcs in Warhammer 40k, where like if everyone believes something works, it works. Like
I was gonna
that's how their magic system works.
I was gonna say, so, you sit all around the raw stone. You claim the stone is a rocket, and then you call it a day.
Because, like, for example, they'll like paint things purple because they think purple is a sneaky color. And then because of the magic system of their world, they actually become more sneaky if they're painted purple, even if they're standing in a field of green, so to speak. It's really fun. Anyways.
It kind of ties into that, except that the constructivist perspective is ultimately also a lonely perspective, because it kind of also, nudges us towards the idea that we're all just our brains.
We're all a brain swimming in its own universe and its own influences and its own senses that can never truly connect.
Exactly. And we're trying our best. So we're trying our best to reach out and to connect and to make sense. And to be able to function in any way, shape, or form, there are certain baselines that we just accept as the truth, as right, and is also oftentimes a line where we draw between the mentally healthy and the mentally unhealthy. For example, if enough people see something as yellow and somebody is desperately trying to tell you it's green, to them it might actually be green, but if enough things come together where people say this is too different from us, that person is already a case that might be considered mentally unhealthy and wrong. And
I agree with your
you know.
approach, right? Like if I had to put art into the scientific orbit or into the constructivist orbit, right? Like if we accept these as two fairly valid philosophies for describing different parts of life, right? Art would, for me, certainly fall into the constructivist corner, right? And not into
Yeah.
the scientific corner. And so I fundamentally agree with your approach, right? What you're saying is a lot of like what I said earlier on the subjective level. I mean, you're saying it in your way with much more knowledge and background on it. I was just saying it sort of in my layman's way, right? But I would agree on a subjective level to art almost always inevitably appeals to at least one person. And so it must, if it had, it's really hard for art to have no value on the subjective level because somebody just needs to say, I like it. And then for that person on the subjective level, that art has value.
And oftentimes people, like we already said earlier, people interact with art in ways that the creator didn't intend, right?
But that still work.
Yeah, people might pick up on something and consider it art that the person who created it or created the circumstance around it never intended for it to be art. People see a person cleaning in a gallery and go, wow, very fascinating performance art, there's a lot of ways to view art, and just because of that plurality, I would like to posit that it's really, really, really hard and really challenging to make bad art, even if people create propaganda, for example. There's an entirely a way that people might view it and look at it that you would find morally acceptable, even though the background and the context in which it's created you might otherwise find repugnant.
So what I thought was interesting, though, was what you were saying that, like, we have, like, this normative effect of mental health, sort of where people's perspectives align a lot and then outliers exist. Those are likely to be drawn on the other side of a boundary called mental health, right?
Yeah.
Well, that normative effect of aligning perspectives, right? I think that's exactly the pseudo-subjective level, right? So how do you feel about that? That you could sort of say, well, this art resonates with this one particular person, but it doesn't resonate with a broad audience. And therefore, on that pseudo-subjective level, it has less value. Like when you try to average perspectives, so to speak, and create sort of a meta-consciousness, right? By like aligning all these different constructivist perspectives and saying, yeah, okay, but if ever all of these people all say that they don't appreciate this piece of art, couldn't you say then that on that level, it's a worse piece of art?
Well, it depends on how how radical you want to be and how much you can bear to deviate from the norm, right? Because the pseudo-subjective perspective is the perspective of peer pressure at the end of the day. It's the voice of the many, but that does not make it always right, and why I find the pseudo-subjective perspective interesting, but ultimately not entirely relevant when we discuss art, is the purpose of art.
I think
itself.
that at some point you need to start like finding a way to judge the general appeal and the broad appeal of an art piece versus. Why? Well, because art has no intrinsic value without people, because beauty doesn't exist without an observer, because without a subject, an art piece is not an art piece. It's a bunch of atoms clumped just like anything else. So
exactly.
If there is a single person who enjoys it and everybody else doesn't like it, or if everybody likes it except one person, do we just like, of course, without like the people, there is no value to the art piece. So do we value?
I would like to posit that all it takes is one person liking an art piece for it to be valuable.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm hearing, right? I'm hearing from Proteus, as long as one person likes it, art has value. And I'm hearing from Theia, well, I'm a little bit more interested in where the average trend is. And I think
I have another question, though.
If I can briefly expose you, I feel like this reveals a lot about the art that you guys view. where Proteus reads a lot of fan fiction, which has like niche audiences and is designed to be expressive of one author working for free on their own time to be read by, I mean, sometimes
Like,
very many people,
or
but
like
sometimes
three.
No, I don't think. I don't
Yeah,
think
exactly.
that fan fiction. I don't think that fan fiction is that niche anymore. At least, well, it depends which
Well,
which
but there are
fandom.
many fan fictions, like there's many
Yeah.
fics specifically that are read by almost nobody, right? Like a D&D campaign.
There's just a huge wealth of it, is what Ceres is expressing.
Whereas a lot of what Theia watches, right, or reads and talks about with me are sort of these forms of art, such as movies, TV shows, and books, which are sort of read by a broad audience, and where the response of the broad audience is very important to like where the art's going to go and if it's going to be successful, and are we going to see more of it? Am I going to get more Brandon Sanderson books? Well, not if only Brandon Sanderson likes them. Then I'm definitely, you know what I mean?
And I would also like to turn this around and say that I'm frequently a person who is exposed to popular media and does not connect to it, you know, or only connects to a very specific part of certain things. And that doesn't make the media I don't appreciate any more or less valuable, you know, because it's just not for me, and it doesn't have to be, because we have enough space. There is enough room for us all to all have just, you know, some art that we like. There doesn't need to be a popularity contest and only the most popular art gets to continue to survive, right?
So
I'm
now
happy
I
to
have
split my
another
perspective.
question. I have another question from Proteus.
Yes.
What if there isn't a single person who doesn't? I don't have an answer here. I'm not challenging you like, oh, you're wrong. But like, what do you think if there's not a single person who likes a piece of art? Everyone hates it, including
Everybody
the author.
hates it.
Everybody hates it.
Including-
Everyone recognizes it art, but everyone hates it. Is there value to art that is universally despised as like bad art?
Yeah,
Because
I mean,
it's
I
still
would
recognized
say,
as art.
I would say then there's a couple of questions, right? First of all, why does this piece of art exist? You know, what led to its creation? What
Oh,
was
trust me,
the
I created a lot of art pieces that I hate.
yeah, and every artist creates things that they themselves don't like and aren't proud of, and frequently they might show that piece and be kind of like, yeah, it's kind of bad, right? And people go like, yeah, it's not great, but that doesn't make the art, you know, worthless if it is
It
part
has
of
value
the-
as a rough draft. It has value as a don't do this.
or it has value as something that you need to go through to practice, because a lot of art requires a lot of practice. So even if what happens during practice isn't liked by anybody, it is still invaluable in the fact that it exists, because it teaches you things, it helps you learn.
Well, now you're
And-
putting a more practical and like didactic value on art. But like, if the art is inherently valuable regardless of its function, then there should be an argument that is, even in this art is the most useless thing, you didn't learn anything from it.
Yeah.
Would it still be bad?
So
at some point,
there's this briefly. There's this story that this reminds me of, right? Nothing by Anatella.
yeah, I remember that. It was a traumatic book we had to read in high school.
Oh, we read it too.
Yes, where this one kid in the school class goes, nothing is worth anything. Life doesn't have any meaning. There's
Nothing has any meaning.
Nothing has any meaning.
That's
There's
the
no sense
Teenager
behind
discovers
anything.
Schopenhauer.
There's nothing. Yeah, there's nothing worth living for. Nothing is special. There's nothing worth striving for, and I would like to posit it does not matter whether there's anything to be striving towards.
Just a second. So the rest of the book is all the other people in the class trying to prove by making greater and greater sacrifices, they try to build a mountain of meaning, i.e. a literal mountain of objects that are meaningful to each person. And it escalates because each person is asked to sacrifice more than the one previous.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, they
sell
don't
the
really
art
end up
piece.
proving...
Yeah, they
At the
instead
end
of
of the day, they
selling
don't
the art
really
piece
end
to a
up
museum.
proving the kid wrong. They just...
Yes, because
They drive themselves crazy trying to find meaning because ultimately they can't, even in sacrifice, find meaning.
Exactly, and because the one thing that creates meaning is your choice to create meaning. If you cannot choose to create meaning, there is none, and that's the constructivist, the lonely brain way of looking at art. Is you can choose to make it meaningful or you cannot, and whether or not it is inherently meaningful or not doesn't matter. For me, how I judge art is that it's really hard to have bad art because I personally value the creation of art, the process, the background, the context. But
when you say it's really hard, but I think the point that Thea is really trying to drill on is it possible? Is it possible to have bad art? Can you conceive of a bad art?
Can I conceive of a bad art?
Because I would say there's maybe an argument to be made that if all art is good art, the word good doesn't mean anything. And we do want to have these conversations where we judge art sometimes. They're interesting conversations because they help us grow as artists, right? Mm-hmm. They help us produce art we personally like more. They help us produce art the masses like more. I see it's a very valid criticism, right? Basically, you say, I agree with you on the subjective level, but how much does the pseudo-subjective level even matter? Mm. And I would say, well, I'm happy to split my definition of value across these two different levels and say, well, good in this sense, good in another sense, and say that the pseudo-subjective level does matter to me sometimes. After this conversation with you, I'm like, maybe it matters to me a little bit less often than it did before. But if I want to write a bestseller, right? Or if I want to explain why one MCU movie did better than another, right? Sure. I need to adopt that perspective sometimes in order to have a constructive, not constructivist conversation about the merits of art.
Again, those things are then influenced. It's not just art for art's sake in that case, right? It's not just art as a free-floating concept. It is art that is supposed to be commercial success.
Or art that's supposed to appeal to many people, exactly. Right? Because commercial success and appealing to many people has a correlation to it, right? Mm.
Yeah. Also, another angle is that there are two. I think you can also draw two axes, like the axis of how much I like this, and the axis of is it good though. And like the fact that something isn't good doesn't mean that it doesn't have a right to exist, but it can still be bad. There are movies that I enjoy from genres that I enjoy where like even if the movie is like not very good, I'm going to enjoy it more than if it was a good movie from a genre that I don't enjoy. So for example, there's a certain trilogy of prequels of a certain science fantasy series, which, the Star Wars prequels, like, they're not bad, but a lot of people like them. And some people have the honesty of admitting that they like them, but they're still bad movies. And I think that that's, like, a fine thing to accept, that like just because they're not very good movies, they have still doesn't mean that they don't have a right to exist. And we can still all enjoy them while saying that, like, by our contemporary sensibilities of like action movies of the genre, they're not good. And they're not good because the plot is nonsense and the dialogue is not very good. And if the plot is nonsense in a child's cartoon, Saturday morning cartoons, then that's okay. But in this other medium, we call it a bad movie.
You sort of use this example where you say the movie is bad, but I'm still entertained, right?
Yeah.
Sort of for me, an example of that was Deadpool 3, the one with Wolverine. I was like, this movie shouldn't work, but I am thoroughly entertained, and I enjoyed
we had a long discussion about that because on that one, I'm like, no, actually, that movie should not exist. Does not have a right to exist.
Yeah, from my perspective, it was like this movie breaks all the rules of what makes a movie that I normally like, but I still very much enjoyed it, right? And I think the thing is, right, your argument, Thea, you're using good and bad to express those things, but someone could say, well, it's a movie that doesn't conform to the genre, but it's still a good movie if many people liked it, right? Or it's still a good movie to me personally.
Again,
I don't know.
I think
to me, that movie
of definition, like you said.
Yeah. To me, that movie is almost like the maximum expression of its genre. Like, if you turned up the genre to the maximum. It's like, this is just action figures. This is just slamming action figures together for 1.5 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is
there's
just
this- it's not just action,
And
right?
yet-
It's about like the characters. It's about like
Yeah,
look at this
I know,
character in its suit
tropey as
and
hell.
this character. Yeah, exactly. Now we're making them interact, and now you're watching Deadpool talk to Blade. Isn't this cool?
Yeah.
It's like not really,
mean,
but
That
Ceres is
Honda
entertained.
Odyssey, man. It
That
had
Honda
something.
Odyssey. The worst car, the worst car, the worst possible car.
I don't know. I would like to enter the Cybertruck as the worst car, actually.
There you are with your moral opinions again.
Well,
On
honestly,
art.
in terms of the ratio between the delta between expectations and the actual product, the Cybertruck might be the worst car. Like,
So I feel like
It barely costs.
summarizing our conversation, I think it's very important to have a personal definition of art. It's very important to be specific with your language. Good to whom? Good in what way? Good at conforming to a genre versus good to me personally, as in I was personally entertained, versus good to a broad mass of people versus good on a moral level are all very different things. And if you just say movie good or movie bad, then you're missing out on all of that nuance. And that basically there's these different levels and perspectives you have to keep in mind. That sometimes there's sort of a collective consciousness perspective that you can take, and sometimes there's the personal level that you can take. And I would definitely agree that on just the personal subjective level, it is hard for art to be bad. I think there's probably some art that is bad, like literally nobody likes and nobody needed. And like it's not that nobody likes it, even because you were saying this earlier thing, everybody hates it. What if just everybody has no reaction to it? And I'd be
That
like,
would be
yeah.
worse. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be worse, right? And so I'm like, yeah, if like literally nobody has any reaction to it and it's never even observed, it's probably not great art, right? Like, come on. Otherwise, what does the term great mean? But yeah, so there's that subjective level and then there's sort of the collective level. And on the objective level, I think we kind of all agree that you can't just say in a vacuum something is objectively good as art or objectively bad as art.
Yeah. Absolutely, Mujik.
Yeah.
I think especially
Yeah.
when it comes to art, you should just try and see if you like it yourself.
I do think your perspective, Proteus, is very encouraging, right? Your perspective would make me want to make more art, right? And would make me happier about the art that I make. And that might have value in and of itself, right? A perspective that keeps you making art and keeps you appreciating art.
Yeah.
And
You'll be able to find something meaningful in a lot of things that you find around yourselves.
And I think we would all agree with the statement that like there's a lot more good art than people think, maybe, right?
Exactly.
I think a lot of people come into judging art just with like, did I personally like it? And there's actually a lot more good art than that, probably.
Mm.
And so if I can leave this part of the discussion on anything else, it would be just to the audience, think to yourself, is there art out there that you personally do not like, but that is still good? I think that's the crux of the thing to think about when you're getting into this.
yeah. Are we moving to well, they're not straw men, they're just regular men, so they're
discussion,
flesh men.
yeah.
Are we moving to the meat men? To the meaty boys?
Yes, we can do flesh men.
I have a flesh man.
Disgusting.
All right,
I have a
how about
flesh man.
each of us do a flesh man and then we'll wrap up the episode.
Okay.
Okay. So you brought up earlier, you wanted to talk about, you had the fleshman of morality. And of like, is art good, is art bad? So I had a kind of spin on that. And since we already addressed the moral question, I will bring a specific genre of art that I find very interesting. Maybe you can, now I start listing a couple of titles and then let's see if you can start picking up the theme.
Okay.
BoJack Horseman,
Mm-hmm.
Fight Club, Taxi Driver, American Psycho, Starship Troopers, Rick and Morty. We feeling it?
It's parodies?
Well, I think parody is the wrong word, but satire. Satire is the correct word.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, that's better.
It's satirical art, and specifically, I picked all kinds of satirical art that has made the people who were being satirized go, "This is pretty cool. This is badass." Specifically, to quote, Alan Moore has talked about fans coming up to him and going like, "I am Rorschach. He is me." And
Oh God.
and him going like, "Well, that's nice, but I don't want to interact with you anymore."
Yeah.
And I was wondering, like, there's all this art that is very much explicitly trying to like communicate a certain meaning, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, um, it failed. It failed for reasons that might come across maybe as a little bit judgmental to some, but I think that like they come across as they fail because the artists, on the one side, the artists are too preoccupied with presenting, with still making high sophisticated art and presenting whichever they are representing in a like realistic manner, in a hope to kind of like strike more at the heart of the audience. And on the other side, on the people who are supposed to be like the recipients of the satire and who are supposed to like internalize some lesson about themselves and maybe change, who maybe do not have the best critical thinking skills or like media literacy skills to decode the art. And I don't want to frame it as like it's their moral failure, but like it's one person is speaking Sumeric and the other one is an Egyptian. You know,
I mean, to me, this would be a question of the audience, right? Like the audience that doesn't if the movie is meant to be understood by a certain audience and that audience doesn't understand it, then I don't think the movie is good at what it's trying to do. But if the movie is good at is intended for a certain audience and does describe its satirical message to them well, then it is good, right, at what it's trying to do. So I think like with that kind of art where like it can get very heady and very like around three corners and you need a lot of context, it depends on how it resonates with the audience. On a subjective level, you can say I liked this because I got it, or you can be like I didn't get the reference, this was shit, right? And on a pseudo-subjective level, you can say, well, the people who were supposed to get it got it, and the people who weren't supposed to get it didn't get it, and that's okay.
Can you enjoy this art without getting it? Like getting the reference?
yeah, also like
It gets
yeah,
a lot
exactly.
harder,
Like,
right?
did the
Like, I
art
would
like
say-
is the art like is it a failure? Like, you know, Watchmen is a very successful graphic novel. And but like a lot of people, it's very successful, but a lot of people like misread parts of it. And
Right, so, like,
so they're enjoying it. They're enjoying, and I mean, this goes into like auteur theory and death of the author. Like, is Alan Moore more or less like, is Watchmen better or worse if it appeals to a broader audience that it wasn't even meant to appeal to?
By compromising its message, or somehow by
not even actively
by having them
compromising
not
it.
get the message.
Yeah, exactly.
By having
And
people
like
market.
exactly like Fight Club is a book originally that is the whole of Fight Club is like essentially a book about the alt-right before the alt-right. It's a book about all these men who have been failed by capitalism, and put the blame on kind of like the lack of masculinity in modern society. And it was written by a gay man, and yet here we are, all of these like alt-right guys praising Fight Club and like bringing Tyler Durden up as this like cool guy to emulate, a symbol of masculinity.
Yeah,
exactly.
I like that example because there's a more recent film called Bottoms that is actually
I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it. I want to see it.
It's a take basically on the Fight Club premise, and it does the original material a lot better because the coolness factor of the main characters isn't there. You know, there is no appeal to the straight man. Let's say it like that. So,
I mean, I would say, right, like, so because I misunderstood your question earlier. Really, what the question is, I think that your phrasing is, if I don't understand art in the way the author wanted me to, but I still enjoy it, is the art good to me? And I would say, well, that you have to ask that person. But if somebody sits down and watches Fight Club and they enjoy it and the message completely whizzes over their head, that they were entertained, inspired, or taught something by the movie, even if it isn't what the author intended, even if it's just, wow, that keyboard sequence was really cool, maybe I'll turn that into a music video, right?
Yeah. It can be bad satire, but good entertainment.
Exactly, right? And so then I think it depends on where you narrow your definition. I kind of leave this conversation with my subjective, pseudo-subjective, and sort of genre analyses of goodness. These are my 3 levels of goodness, although I have to say the last 2 levels I think are kind of the same thing. And so then I would say, right, well, to that person, it was good. But in terms of being good satire, it failed this individual. And if you have something that is satire that where nobody got it, then it's not good satire, right? But it could still be a good movie if people enjoyed it, right? So that's sort of where I would land on it. Do we want to do another Fleshman?
Yeah.
Okay. My Fleshman is, here's a different potential goodness criteria that you could use. Will I watch it? So people talk about, we have all these discussions about this is good and that is good, and it seems like there's infinite things that are good, but very few things are good enough to make it into the actual watch list, and then actually they get watched by you at some point and actually enjoyed. And so I guess part of this question is sort of posing the idea is something good if you never end up watching it? Right? Like, is something only good if it really is good enough to make it on your watch list? Is that a better or more intelligent criterion for goodness to be using when you apply it to art?
So this is again media that can be consumed, like it's, I assume, films and
right. Like clearly this is like a film and TV show example, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you are influenced by it without consuming it in its entirety, then I think you could argue it's done a job.
Yeah, I also think that like you're kind of like the whether you're gonna watch it or not is like influenced by a lot of factors, but it's not influenced by whether you actually like it or not, because you will not know whether you like it or not before you watch it. So there's a lot of steps of separation before how appealing, how good it is, and how like, and whether you're going to watch it, and then goes through like how much it captures the current zeitgeist, you know. Severance is absolutely capturing the zeitgeist and everyone's talking about it, but the first time that Squid Game was pitched in the 1990s, nobody thought it was very interesting, and the script was scrapped, and then the guy proposed it again in 2019 or something, and then it was the hottest shit ever, right? And if Squid Game had come out in the 1990s, yeah, I know, but if in the 1990s nobody would have been like, oh yeah, you gotta watch Squid Game, or like a couple of people would have, and when Squid Game came out, everybody was talking about it. So I think that like will I watch it is so is like so bound by like time, place, zeitgeist, personal preference, and like your personal echo chamber of media opportunity, that it's like, no, like in all honesty, like I'm trying to take this premise seriously, but I don't think so.
So I think the way I come down on it is from a pseudo-subjective perspective. Whether or not you watch it is kind of irrelevant because you're one person in a faceless horde of billions of consumers. But if it comes to your own subjective level, whether or not you will watch it says a huge amount about how much you actually like the thing, because on a subconscious level. And I think sometimes people say, oh yeah, I'm so excited for that, or oh, that's so awesome, I'm so happy they're making that, but then they don't end up watching it. It shows that on a conscious level they endorse it, but on a subconscious level they probably don't like it enough to make time to watch it, right? Or of course there can be other barriers that like limit you, but generally speaking, if you really like something, you'll make time to see it. And that's sort of the other flip point of it. I don't think on a subjective level you should make an opinion of a movie until you have gone through the hurdle of watching it, right? And so, because this is something I think I see come up a lot, where people decide something is shit based on the trailer or before they've even seen it. And I would say if you haven't watched a movie, you really shouldn't give your subjective opinion on it, other than it didn't look interesting enough for me to watch it, right? But whether or not it's truly good to you, you don't know yet, because you didn't do the thing where you saw whether or not it gave you that reaction, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is why I went to see Sinners by Ryan Coogler, and you are racist.
Okay. Last Flexman, Proteus, bring us home.
Oh goodness.
You don't have to have one. We can just go into the outro.
I think I would just encourage people to consume more art. There's so much art that already exists, and it's so easily viewed. I mean, there's so many different mediums, and even things that you wouldn't think of as art initially, like I said, like almost an hour ago, that are art, like makeup and fashion that you're surrounded by constantly, that you can look into and be inspired by, and see whether it makes you think about things. And I think that's another valuable thing about art, is, maybe it'll make you think, maybe it'll make you reconsider your little meat prison.
I definitely think thinking, right, there are merits just to thinking about art, thinking about why you like something or don't like something, and if art makes you think in a entertaining and easy way, then why not, right? That seems good.
Yeah, why does it exist? Why does it speak to me? Why does it not speak to me? Why does it disgust me? Why does it, make me want to cry?
Perfectly for this episode now. I mean, we do this on every episode, but do you guys have anything you want to plug?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Me too. You go first.
Okay, I have just finished reading The New Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan. He's a historian who wrote The Silk Roads, a book that kind of like seeks to retell the world's history through the lens of trade. So it doesn't focus on a specific region, but it just like follows wherever in history great trade routes brought civilizations together, because a lot of the time where the most amount of trade was happening, it was also where civilization was like blossoming the most. And he is particularly interested in like globalization and the interaction of distant cultures. And he wrote a second book called The New Silk Roads, which is like much shorter, and he published it in 2019. And it's kind of about how we are in a period where the West, let's call it, or America and Europe, are becoming less and less the hegemonic force of the world, and there's like a rise in political and economic power in the Middle East and like China, in East Asia. And I think it's been a very interesting book to listen to, because specifically it was written a while ago, and so there's a little bit of hindsight that is interesting and fun to read and be like, oh yeah, he was totally correct about this and this, but like, oh, that one, yeah, he couldn't have seen that one coming probably, but yeah. He was wrong there.
It's pre-pandemic, right?
It's pre-pandemic, but also it's so funny that it's like it's written and talks a lot about the Trump presidency and what that means, but it's Trump 1.0, and it's very funny with the hindsight of Trump 2.0 and the Biden presidency to kind of like put it all into context. And right now I'm reading his other book, The Earth Transformed, which like is a lot more about like the climate crisis and the way that humans and the environment have interacted throughout history. It's very interesting. I literally just started it today, but it's already been very, very promising first chapter. So yeah, Peter Frankopan writes good books.
And don't confuse that with The Planet Remade, which is basically a piece of climate misinformation. Proteus, you had something to plug.
Yes. I have two things. A lot of what we've talked about is from our perspective, because it's our experience, and our experience is very Eurocentric and very white.
Sure.
So, if you also fall into that category, hello. I challenge you listeners to find something that doesn't fall into those categories, and you can identify as art, and to look at it and see what it makes you feel and what it makes you think about. And another one is, have you already talked about Rutger Bregman?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, it's the author Rutger Bregman. Dutch author, and I highly recommend his book Humankind. If you want to feel a little bit better about being a human, even though times right now are not very nice and not pretty tough for pretty much everyone, it's a sort of optimistic outlook on humans, but it is founded in realistic.
It's also an important perspective because lots of really hurtful and harmful ideologies assume humans are fundamentally bad, and therefore you need to treat them in a certain way. And his analysis isn't just a philosophical thing. He brings in scientific and historical data to sort of support his argument. So it could be even particularly important right now.
Exactly, that actually, humans
have value and
we're good.
Should actually make their own decisions. All right, I am going to plug-ish. I'm going to talk about Solar Opposites. So Solar Opposites is a TV show that Theia recommended to me. It's sort of like Rick and Morty because it's made by one of the same guys from Rick and Morty, Justin Roiland.
The bad one.
The bad one with the sex stuff or sexual assault stuff. But it is about two aliens and their replicants, which are basically their children, and their pupa, which is basically their dog, but it's not because it's going to terraform the planet. They've crash-landed on planet Earth, and they have wacky adventures because they're aliens with all kinds of sci-fi stuff, and the rest of the planet is, just normal Earth.
Yeah. I think that it's like Rick and Morty in like aesthetics maybe and vibes, but like plot-wise, it's not Rick and Morty.
So
it's more of a sitcom.
Yeah, it's more because it's got a family, right? And it's more family oriented than Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty is mainly about Rick and Morty and all the family stuff. I mean, I don't know. It's just so it's making fun of the family concept if ever it touches on it. So Rick and Morty also is all about how there's never any moral to the story, and this story Solar Opposites tries to have morals to its stories, like lessons that we learn, and it tries not to live in this totally absurdist world where nothing matters and everything's just shit all the time. And I watched Solar Opposites, and at first I was really digging it, and then at first I was a little lukewarm, but then I was really digging it, and then I was sort of lukewarm on it again. I feel like this show suffers from fancy plot syndrome, where they want to subvert your expectations of the plot so badly that they end up writing a bad plot that is disjointed and doesn't really make sense, and the different components don't come together in a satisfying way. And there was one line that really made me aware to this. It's the episode where they're trying to send the kids to summer camp because they hate being around the kids, and then they get lost in the forest, and then they urbanize the forest and turn it into a city through this sci-fi device that just kind of shoots an acorn into the ground basically and turns it all into a wood city made of wood people.
Yeah, the instant urbanizer.
Exactly. And then the rest of the episode is just them surviving in the big city, and then they come home. And there's this sort of meta commentary that's going on where one of the aliens keeps referring to arcs and how the story's going to pan out, and we're just wait, is this a surviving in the big city story now? And one of them says at one point, I guess the lesson is that in order to tell an emotional story, you have to be willing to play fast and loose with story structure, or something to that effect. And that was the moment where I realized these people are bad at writing stories. I was in order to write, and what is an emotional story? Your story has no emotion because it was badly put together, and because the different plot elements don't work together. And you just wrote a disjointed story and told yourself it's an emotional story, therefore I get to do this. But in the end, I've really started to feel like the plots of the individual episodes aren't doing it for me. There was an episode on sexism where basically the message was sexism is so hard to find that the main challenge in fighting sexism is you can't find it. And I don't think that is the moral of the story that they wanted to do, but it's basically the moral they ended up doing because they wanted to subvert your expectations by making everybody super liberal and super not sexist in this town. And so it's weird because I think I was really enjoying it at first, but the more I watch it, the more I feel like they want to subvert my expectations so badly that they end up not fulfilling the emotional needs that a story has.
It's definitely an acquired taste, and it's also definitely a show that finds its footing over time. I just wanted to ask one more question. How did you like the wall plot?
The wall plot, yeah. So I thought the wall plot was really excellent at first, and I couldn't get enough of it. And then they finished the wall plot, and then they kept doing the wall plot, and I was like, no, it doesn't work. Like, your wall plot was about something, and now you're just continuing the wall plot because you've realized it's so popular, you don't want to end it. And now the wall plot is no longer about what it was originally about, and the wall plot doesn't work for me anymore. So there's this whole subplot where like people are shrunk down and trapped in a wall, but they're just shrunk down. They're still people, and so they have civilization, they have culture, they have ways of interacting with each other, and so all the same kind of stories we have in the outside world are recreated in this small world. And at first it worked for me, and then it came to a really good conclusion, and then they kept doing it, and it didn't work for me anymore. So I was like, the wall plot is amazing, and it's so funny to have a show within your show that's good enough that I actually want to watch the show within your show. It's like Gwent in The Witcher 3, where it's like you have a mini game that's so good that it could be its own game, and it actually did become its own game. Gwent became its own trading card game, separate from The Witcher. So, anyways, all of that to say, I like the wall plot, but then they think they lost their way. And that's kind of the part that I'm in right now. I'm sort of in a phase where I feel like they kind of lost their way, and I don't want to watch my way through 5 bad episodes to see if they get their way back again.
So you're plugging a show where you again pose the question, is this good art? And it's up to you to see whether you like it or not.
But in my opinion, it's not good art for me anymore. So I switched and I went back to Futurama. I've started watching a little bit more of Futurama, and it's still in the trial phase, so I won't put out any opinions yet on anything beyond what we've already done on Futurama. But anyways, that brings us to the end of episode 41 of
Wait.
Orbit.
Has Proteus had a chance to?
Yeah,
plug?
he plugged expanding your artistic horizons.
Yeah. Sorry,
Humankind.
that was so much time ago.
It was only 9 minutes ago. Shut up. That brings us to the end of our 41st episode. You can find more on youtube.com/@afriendlyorbit, as well as Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you're feeling frisky and you have any Astro Echoes you want to send us, you can email us at afriendlyorbit@gmail.com.
And who knows, maybe you'll find the odd city pigeon or two that might also work as a carrier pigeon for your Astro Echoes if you're kind enough to.
If you have found my home address, delete it. And thank you.
All right, guys. I'll talk to you later. And to all of our fellow Voyagers, we will catch you out there amongst the stars.